I'm Ray, and today I'm going to walk you through creating this loan overpayment calculator in Google Sheets. This calculator can be used to see how much earlier you could pay off a loan if you overpay, how much less interest you would pay, and how much less you would pay in total. So let's start by putting in some information tables that we will use later. We'll start here in cell B7 and put in initial amount, hit enter, put in interest rate, hit enter, and put in repayment amount. And make sure I spell repayment correctly. And then we're going to make column B wide enough to fit in all of that text. And we'll make column A smaller so it's just out of the way. We're then going to stick a border around this table so we can say it's something that sits on its own by highlighting all of the cells from B7 through to C9. And then we go and select this icon here, which is for borders, and we select outer borders. Now, depending on which format you used last for your border style, you might need to click on this weighting and go and select that heavier weight of border. Okay, now we're going to scroll out of the visible area of the screen, and we're going to go to P2 and Q2, select both of those cells and merge them together. And in here, we're going to type in the compound interest formula just as a little bit of a reminder so that we know what the cells are that we need to have as references. So we'll put a single quotation mark in there so that I can type the formula without Google Sheets trying to actually calculate anything. Put the equals. P is our principal amount, and we're going to multiply that by 1 plus the interest rate divided by the number of times interest is calculated in a year. We'll close that and we'll raise it all to the power of the number of times that interest is calculated in a year times by the number of years, or the length of time in years that we're going to be calculating each reporting period. So we'll hit enter there. And then I'm going to skip row 3 because we'll make that smaller later so that things look right on the visible portion. And we're going to put some of those numbers that we're not going to refer to regularly into a table here out of the way. Now, the principal amount is that initial amount that we put over here in column B. And R, that's our interest rate. Again, that's something that we've put over here because that's something we might want to change as we're using the calculator. So the first thing we're going to put in here is N, and that's the number of times interest is calculated each within a year. So here it's called the compounding frequency. And we're going to say that it's calculated daily. So I'm going to put in 365 in here. Now, for the sake of keeping this model a relatively reasonable level of complexity, we're just going to pretend that leap years aren't a thing because it won't make much of a difference to the overall result. Then the next in the formula is T. This is the length of time that we're waiting between reporting. So how long is going to pass before we want to have that new amount calculated for us. And that's in years. So we're going to report monthly. So I'm going to put this down as the reporting period. So this is T. And the compounding frequency up here was N. I'm going to put that reporting period to be monthly. So I'm just going to put it as an approximation. So it's equal to 1/12 of a year. Now, if you want a follow-on video where I walk you through creating a more precise calculator that's going to take into account the exact length of each month and take into account leap years, then leave a comment and hit that subscribe button so that you know when I post it, and I will put that video together for you. Okay, looking here then at the formula, we want to calculate 1 plus R over N. We're going to need to calculate that every time we're reporting on the amount of interest that has been accrued on the account. So rather than having to calculate it in every single cell that we're reporting on the interest in, we're going to calculate it once and then allow the cells to use the value that's in this cell. So let's call this the multiplier because it's what P is multiplied by. And we're going to put this is equal to 1 plus, then we want R, which is our interest rate. So we need to scroll over here, pick our interest rate, and then we can come back. We want it to be over N. So that's there. And we can hit enter on there. Now at the moment it's just saying 1. And the reason it's saying 1 is because the interest rate here is blank. So effectively we're saying 1 plus 0 at the moment. The other part of this formula is the N times T. So we're going to put that in here and just call that the index. That's our N times T. And that is just equal to the N here multiplied by the T. And that's never going to change throughout the time that we're using this calculator. And then this last bit, we can say, well, actually, looking at all of this formula, the only bit that I'm going to want to update regularly is the P. That's going to change every time we're recalculating the amount of interest that's been added. So the rest of this formula, we could just calculate it once and then just keep reusing it. And that's what we're going to do here. So we'll just type in the formula and we'll say that is equal to, so we want this 1 plus R over N, which we've got here in the multiplier, raised to the power of, and in Google Sheets we use this hat symbol for that, the N times T, so our index. And we can hit enter on there. And for now it will say 1 because we haven't put anything in the interest rate. But if we go over here to the left and we say, you know what, I'm going to say I've got an interest rate of 5%. We go back over here now, we can see that this has increased. So it's that 1 plus 5% divided by 365. So we're just going to put a thick border around this so we know it's a contained area and we can see it when we scroll across. And we'll scroll back to column C now. Okay, so we'll now start creating our main tables. So I'm going to select B14 and working across this row, we're going to put in the date, hit tab, put in the amount paid in this month, hit tab, put in the interest added this month, hit tab, and put in the account total. Okay, and we're just going to select that and wrap the text. So we come to text wrapping here and select for the text to be wrapped. Then here in B15, I'm going to put in the starting date. So I'm going to select this month and just say December 2025 and hit enter. And then in B16, I want this to be 1 month later. And for that, I'm going to use the EDATE formula. So here, I'm going to put is equal to EDATE. And then I'm going to select the month that I want a month adding to, or the date that I want a month adding to, put a comma, and then tell the formula 1 here in that I want to add 1 month to that date. Close those brackets and hit enter. And we can see we've got a couple of different formats for the date, but we will come back and fix that later. We're going to use the benefits of a table to help us just have to close that off once. Now in C15, this is always going to be the repayment amount. So I'm going to put equals to that repayment amount. So let's put an amount into our repayment amount and say, hey, each month I pay back £300. And we can see that copies off there. Now if I was to just drag down here, it's not dragging down because it's now looking, it thinks it will think I want it to look at the next row down. So we're just going to add in some dollar signs to say, hey, this is a fixed reference. That amount will always be in that cell. And I can drag it down now and I can see it's pulling that amount each month. Now, for the next columns, we're going to want a starting amount as well. So let's say that our starting loan was £8,000. So in the interest added this month, this is where we're going to put in our, this is where we're going to use our compound interest formula. So what we're going to do is we're going to put equals. If I go across and look at the formula, I'm looking for that initial amount. So we're going to select the initial amount. We go back, you can see I need to multiply it, and I want to multiply it by that cell. Now, because in this column, all I want is the interest, and this is going to give me the new account total, I'm going to subtract that initial amount back from my thing. And the QA is another fixed reference. I'm just going to hit the dollar signs around that and hit enter. And I'm going to do the account total before we go down to the next row. So my account total is equal to the amount that I started with minus the amount that I paid in plus the interest that has been added. And I can hit enter. Now that row, that first row, is the only row that is going to refer to this initial amount up here. After this, we're going to always be referring to the account total from the previous month. So here, if I copy this down, actually I don't want to be referring to C8 anymore. I want to be referring to this account total. The same here, I don't want to be subtracting C8, I want to be subtracting that previous account total. And hit enter. The same for this one. If I drag this down, I don't want to be referring to C8. I want to be referring to the previous month's account total. And hit enter. So what we're going to do now is we're going to select all of this, and we can right click and select convert to table. And then we're going to do some changes to the format that's in here. So the first thing I'm doing, I'm going to right click, I'm going to select this column here. So you can select any cell in this column and it's going to apply this formatting to the whole column. I'm going to go to format, number. Now I've used this before, which is why it's showing here. But if you haven't got it, you can go to custom date and time. And we want the one that's just got a month and a year, and hit apply. And as you can see in a table, it carries that column type all the way down. I'm going to do the same here. So paid in this month, format, number, and I want the currency to be the full-on currency one with the decimal point, not the rounded one. And we're going to apply this to all of these cells, all of these columns, sorry. There we go. And that way we can see the pence that's relevant to that account total as well. Okay, so now that we've put that in, let's select row 16 and drag this all the way down to row 100. And what we actually see is that even after we finish paying off the account, we're continuing to say, hey, I'm paying £300 and suddenly I'm no longer in debt and there's still just money getting put in. So let's go back up to row 16 and make some changes. In cell B16, straight after the equals, without deleting anything, we're going to type if roundup of E15, so that's the account total from the month previous, and we're going to say if we round it up to 3 decimal places and that is less than a penny, then we're going to leave this cell blank, and we show that we're leaving it blank by putting these 2 quotation marks with nothing between them, and hit, and then add another bracket to the end of this to show that we've closed off the if, and we hit enter. We're going to do the same thing on column C. In fact, let's drag this down and see that it's worked first. So you can see the months have now disappeared, and the point at which they've disappeared is when the account total is no longer more than a penny. Now, what we can also see is that here we've paid in too much in this month. So even though we want this month still to be reporting, we've paid in too much this month because we've paid in more than that account total. So we're going to do a couple of things up in C16. We're going to do the same thing that we did in January. We're going to do the same thing that we did in B16. So I'm just going to select from where it says the if all the way until that second comma. Press Control C, and then I'm going to go into C16 and Control V, so I've just pasted that in and close it off. Now if we did that, it would get rid of all of the rows, all of the payments after the dates start going blank, but we also want to make sure we're not overpaying in those last months. So we want to put in here is just say that we want the minimum of either that repayment amount or the previous month's account total, and we'll close that. So we make sure we've got all the brackets closed and hit enter. And we don't want that autofill because you can see that's going to take it up to the row before it as well, and we don't have an account total for it to refer to, which is why we're getting that value error in the suggested update. So we'll reject that and we'll manually drag it down to row 100. And we can see there those payments have changed, and we haven't got that £300 payment in those last 2 months. It's just pulling whatever the account total was from the month previous. Now we're going to put a sense check into columns D and E as well, but in these ones we can just say if the date, so that's B16, is blank, then this cell can be blank as well. Otherwise, do the calculation that was in there before. And I can select that bit from the equals all the way to the second comma, press Control C, and we'll go into E16 and just Control V to paste that and close those brackets off at the end. And then we can highlight those and we'll just drag them down to row 100 as well. And there we go. Once the account total hits less than a penny, we no longer have any calculations happening. Okay, so now that we've got some data, we can start to get some summaries in at the top. So we're going to merge B2 and C2. So we select the 2 cells and we select merge cells here. And then if I select B4 down to C5, I'm going to grab that arrow next to the merge and say that I want to merge those horizontally. I'm going to do the same in columns D and E. So D2 and E2, I just want to merge them. And then D4 to E5, I want to merge them horizontally. And I'm going to stick a thick border around that. We select borders, outer borders, and make sure that thick outer border is selected. And the same here. So borders, outer borders. And it uses by default the type that you last selected for that border. Now in B2, this is going to be the date that the debt was paid off. And we're going to say that there were no overpayments. And then in B4, we're going to say this was the total paid and hit enter. And then in B5, that will be the interest paid and hit enter. And I'm just going to make row 3 a little bit narrower, so it's just adding a little bit of separation between those tables. And I'm going to make row 2 quite a bit bigger. Now, because we got the table below to stop adding dates when the debt was finished being paid off, all we need to do is get this cell to tell us what was the last date that was put in the table. And we can do that by just putting equals, max, and I'll start by selecting some of this row, but I want to delete those numbers off the end. So effectively I'm saying I want the maximum thing from column B starting at B15. But by not having a number on the end here, I'm telling it to look at all of column B. And I'm going to do the same in the total paid. Well, a similar thing in the total paid and interest paid. But this time, rather than just looking at the highest value, we want to add all of those payments together. So we go to equals, sum, and that's going to tell it to add them all. And we want the paid in, because that will give us the total number of payments we've made. And again, I just want to delete those numbers off the end because I want it to look at the entirety of that column. I just want it to start at row 15. We hit enter, and I'll do the same thing in this next cell down. I'm going to equal sum, and this time it's going to be for column D. So we'll start at D15, delete those numbers off the end so that it knows it's looking at that whole column just starting at D15, and we can hit enter. Let's add some formatting to really make those summaries stand out. I'm going to select all of those cells and set the font size to be 12, set them to be bold. I'm going to put text wrapping in and just hit wrap on there. Then I want these two cells, so I'm going to select from B2 to E2 and say that I want the vertical alignment to be in the middle and I want the horizontal alignment to be in the middle. Then I'm going to select this cell with the date in it and say, you know what, I want the text size to be a little bit bigger there. And I'm going to fill it with this blue. I'm going to make the text white and just really make that date stand out. And then for my interest paid, I'm going to fill that with red. And I'm going to make the text white again. And now that we've got this side of the table finished, we can copy some of this over to the other side. So I'm going to select this table, hit Control C, and we go into G14 and Control V. And we can just see that something's not carried across properly from that very first row where we didn't lock in those values for the fixed references for this table. So I just need to come back in here and say that shouldn't be H, it should be C. Same here, I want that to be C. And again here, where I've got a H7, I want that to be C7. Now we just ignore those auto suggestions. And I know if I've corrected that properly, because when I come down to these last rows here, we can see it's ended in exactly the same way. I now want to copy from B2 to E5, so I'm going to hit Control C and go over there and Control V. And I'm going to make column F a little bit narrower. It's just there to give some separation between the two sides. Now to be able to see between the two tables, I want to select table 1. I'm just going to change that header color to be blue, well, bluish. And then we'll leave this one as green, and I'll just select this fill bit here and say that I want that to be green. So we've got a bluish side and we've got a greenish side. Now this table here, this is our no overpayments. And this one is our with overpayments, or it will be when we've finished. And hit enter. Okay. Okay, so now that we've said that this is the overpayment side, let's add an overpayments table. We're going to select G7 through to J7. We're going to merge those. I'm going to set the fill color to be dark grey and the text to be white. And we're going to type overpayments in here. I'm going to make that text bold, make it size 12 and put it into the center. Then I'm going to move on to G8 and I'm going to just type in the fields that we want. So we want the amount of the overpayment, enter. We want the frequency. We want the month and the year. Okay, and we'll just select all of that and put a nice thick border around the outside. And then just select the ones that are on the inside. We'll go back to borders. I'm going to stick some vertical borders, but make them thinner. And then stick some internal horizontal borders and just make those dotted. Now that we've got here, we're going to stick some drop downs in. So this frequency row here, so selecting from H9 through to J9, that I want that to be my frequency and I want it to be a drop down with a few options. So we'll select them, we go to data, go to data validation. We're going to add a rule. And here we've got it already selected as drop down, so we need to put in our options. And our options are going to be monthly, enter, annually, hit enter, and one off. I then want to go into advanced options and just change that display style to be an arrow and hit done. Then for the month, again, we want this to be a drop down, but before we can make that data validation, we just need to scroll over here to row S. I'm going to click on S4 and start typing the month. So we've got January and February. I can then select those two cells and drag down to row 15, and that's going to give me the 12 months. I can now go back and select H10 through to J10, so that's the month row. We've still got our data validation rules open, so I can click add rule. And this time in the criteria, I want drop down from a range. And I'm going to select that box with the squares in it, because that will then allow me to scroll back over to column S and select S4 through to S15 and hit OK. And that's going to then auto populate with all the months here. I can then just select advanced options and again change that display style to an arrow and hit done. So I now go over here and I can see I've got drop downs for frequency and I've got drop downs for the month. Now you don't have to just use the drop down, you can also just start typing the month and it will give you the options then. Okay, we're also going to add some conditional formatting to this. So if we close the data validation rules and select from H10 through to J11, and we go format, conditional formatting, we're going to apply a formula rule here. So we're going to put a custom formula and we'll say that is equal to H9 is equal to monthly. So what we're saying here is for all of this range, if H9 is equal to monthly, then do whatever formatting we put here. But because this range changes columns and changes rows, we need to tell Google Sheets whether this formula is relative to this first cell, in which case it will always just look at the cell above each of these, or if H9 is a fixed reference. And it's a little bit of both. So the H isn't fixed. We want it to change columns as the cells change column, but we want it to stay looking at row 9. So we're going to stick a $sign in front of the 9. And we're going to change the formatting on the text and the fill to be a grey and hit done. So now if I was to select monthly from this frequency, you can see it fills in these cells with grey. And that's basically just telling you when you're using it, hey, you don't need to put a value in here. This is something that happens every month. And that's it. But actually, we also want to add some formatting for annually, because if something happens annually, we also don't need the year to be put in. So let's select the year here and click. So we're selecting cells H11 through to J11, and we'll hit add another rule. And we're going to do pretty much the same thing again. We'll put the custom formula equal to H9 is equal to annually. And you can see it's coloring in green here because it's already found one that complies with that formula. But again, we just want to color it in with grey. So we'll select the fill to be grey and the text to be grey. And that just blanks out that cell and says we don't need to use it. And we don't need to lock in any of this because we're only applying it to one row and we want it to move along with the columns anyway. So we can hit done and close that. Okay, so we'll get rid of those. Now just to update the paid in this month column on this table and we'll be done. So we select H15. I'm going to add a plus to the end here to say, hey, we've got some stuff we might need to add. And I'm going to add a new row by holding control and then hitting enter. And I'm just going to drag this formula bar down so I can see what I'm typing. Now, you don't technically need a new row, but I find with the amount of conditions that we're about to add to this, it's easier to see it all if you put things on their own row. It won't make any difference at all to how Google Sheets reads the formula. So we're going to start by filtering all of the monthly overpayments. And we'll do that by typing in filter. And we're saying that the values we want to filter are the ones that are going to be in these cells. And in this first instance, we want these values if this frequency is set to monthly. And just need to remember to put in the quotation marks. Now, if we have more than one monthly overpayment, we need to tell Google Sheets what we want it to do with those payments. Add a sum and open the brackets before the filter. And then we'll add a close brackets at the end of the row. Additionally, filter will return an error if there's no match. So we need to tell Sheets what we want it to do if that happens. And to do that, we can use the IFERROR formula. And then we'll go to the end of the row and put a comma followed by a 0 and close those brackets. And basically what we're saying there is try to do this, but if it doesn't work, return a 0 and don't add anything extra into that paid in column. Let's put a plus on the end of that row and we can select all of this formula here, press Ctrl C to copy it, Ctrl Enter to put that new line, and Ctrl V to paste it back in. And we're going to change the part that says monthly to be annually. We're going to look at those annual payments next. And once we've changed this to annually, we'll need to add a comma, and we're going to add a second condition. So this time, these payments are only going to happen once a year on the month that we're told in row 10. So we're going to select H10 through to J10, and there's loads of ways you can do any of this in Google Sheets, but I know that the month is always going to be on the left hand side of this date column. I know there's going to be a space straight after the date. So I'm going to use the left formula to say, hey, look at this date column and I want you to give me the left hand side of it up until you get to the space. So I'll use the search, put a space into some quotation marks. I'm going to tell it you're looking in that cell. But I don't actually want the space in my comparison, so I need to stick a -1 on the end of this just to say, hey, okay, look in row 10, compare it to the month in that cell, in that date cell. If they match, perfect. That's an annual payment that happens this month. Now we're going to put a plus on the end of this row as well. And we're going to copy this formula, go Control Enter, and paste it into this new row. And this is the final row. This is where we're going to look at those one-off payments. So we need to change annually to be one-off. We can leave the month bit as it is, but we need to add another comparison because these will only happen in 1 year as well. So we add that column and we say, okay, well, we need through to J11 to be equal to the year in that date column, in that date cell. So the year in G15, and hit enter. And that's it. That's the formula put into this month, and we can test that it's working by putting some amounts into the overpayments column. So I can see if I add a £300 monthly overpayment, it's increased that to 600. If I put in £50 additional monthly payment, it's increased to 650. I could put in £1,000 and set it to be an annual payment. Now, because we've only done this row, it needs to match December or it won't change anything. If I put that in for December, I can see it's added that £1,000 to there. I can change this one to be a £500 one-off that happens in December 2025. And as soon as I hit enter on this, you'll see the amount change in the cell to add that 500. So we know that the formula is working. It's adding the numbers as we would expect it to. Before we copy this into any of the other cells, we just need to fix those references that are referring to that overpayments table. So we're going to go through and put in all of these $signs to say, hey, these cells will not change, this range will not change. And I can just highlight these and copy it down to the bits where we've got the same references. I'll just paste that in there and paste it again in here. And we'll continue putting the $signs against these ones. And copy and paste that down. And the last lot of dollar signs goes against the H11 through to J11. We ignore that suggested upgrade because we don't want it. Now we copy all of this formula, just ignoring the equal sign, but we copy everything else. And then we go into the next cell down. We want to just pick the bit that says C9. We don't want to grab the bracket by mistake. We just pick just the bit that says C9 and we paste that formula in. And I'm just going to Control Enter to get the part of that extra part of formula onto a new line. And then what we need to do is just go through and all these references that we put into the date column, just update them to be referring to the correct row. And there's 5 of them, so we've got 1, 2, 4, and this last one here. There we go. And you can hit enter now and escape this. And then we just want to select that cell H16 and drag it all the way down to row 100. And we can see it has updated. So we're seeing we're getting those monthly payments of 600 through now to take account of that additional monthly payment. So let's try closing up this formula bar and taking a look then at our dashboard. So we can see how these payments have affected it. Let's see what happens if we change some of these overpayments and how that's going to affect what we pay. So first we can check, well, what if I change when I pay this one-off overpayment? What if I pay it in 2026 instead? And we can see that that has delayed when we're going to finish paying off the debt, and it's changed the amount of interest that we would have paid. And also let's change this annual payment. Let's make it happen in March. And again, see the effect that has on the interest. Now that hasn't changed when we would pay off our debt, but it has changed the amount of interest that we would pay. And that's reflected in where these numbers are sitting down here. So if I change this back to December, you can see those overpayments are happened earlier, so we're just accumulating less interest down this column. And we'll see that happen more repeatedly if we change this initial amount up to 18,000. And we can see the October 30, 2031 is when we would have paid it off originally. And if we do these updates, if we do these overpayments, we'd pay it off in March 2028. So we can see this £1,000 annual payment happening every December. And in this December 2026, we can also see there was a one-off payment of 500 that brought it up higher. And every month we can see that monthly payment. So thanks for sticking with us this far if you're still here. And if you found this video useful, then please hit that like button. If you'd like to see more of the videos when they're posted, then please hit the subscribe button. And if you've got any ideas, leave me a comment. Let me know. If you've got any thoughts on anything I could have done differently or that you would have done differently, then I'd love to hear it from you in the comments. Cheers all. Hope to see you next time.